Weaving isn't a word you hear tossed around too much outside of your history class's Industrial Revolution unit anymore, but that doesn't mean the art is dead. Today, I'm going to teach you the basics of setting up a loom to keep the art from fading any more than it already has. Before you start your project, you need to take into account what size your project will be, what pattern you'll use, and the different materials you can use. Here's the pattern we chose for this project. The components of the pattern are labeled above. For this video, we'll be focusing on the warp threads and the treadles. Before we start setting up, we need to know the components of the loom. First is the shaft. This is what lifts the thread to create a pattern. This loom has 8 of them, but we'll only be using 4. Next is the reed and beater bar, which helps get the weft threads into place as you weave. We won't be covering weft threads in this video, but it's important nonetheless. The final component for right now is the treadles. These are the pedals on the bottom of the loom that lift the shafts. This is our warp. It has 13 ends, and when unwound, it reaches 3.5 meters. Now that we have everything we need, we can start to set up the loom. First, find the closed loop at the end of your warp and attach it to the metal bar at the back of your loom. Alongside this loop at the end of your warp, there should be an X. Your leash sticks go in there. Be careful not to twist your warp when you put the leash sticks in, as it may interfere with your weaving later on. Make sure to tie the end of your leash sticks closed to ensure that the yarn doesn't fall off. You don't want to have to do it all over again once you have it. You also want to tie the leash sticks to the upper back of your loom to keep them in place. It may be difficult tying up the leash sticks one-handed, so I would recommend getting some help holding them up while you do it. Once the back is attached, you need to wind on. You cannot do this part alone. I cannot emphasize that enough. I have my mom helping me out, though she's just off screen. The person behind the loom is responsible for turning the crank that will wind the material actually onto your loom. The person in front is responsible for keeping the warp taut and for undoing any of the bows that keep the warp from tangling. You'll notice that I'm putting paper between each revolution of the back beam. This is done to keep your warp threads from tangling while they're on your loom. Once you finish winding on, you can move on to threading. Carefully cut the end of your warp. Just the very end you want to leave as little waste as possible, and then you'll start to thread. You need to reference the warping thread section of your pattern to get the order of threading. The first shaft is the equivalent to the bottom line on the warping thread section of the pattern. The second shaft is the line just above, and so on. You'll use the metal heddles in each shaft to make your pattern. Make sure not to twist the yarn in the process. Once you're finished, it'll look something like this. Once you're done threading through the shafts, you need to thread through the reed. This is much easier, don't worry. First and foremost, you need to put the beater bar back on. This is where your reed is held. Once you have your reed back on your loom, you need to find some sort of hook. I used a bent paper clip to pull the threads one by one through the reed. Make sure you pull the threads in order, because this will be the actual order that your threads end up in when you weave. Twisted threads or threads that are out of order will cause a problem in your final product. The problem will be especially noticeable if you have different colors in your warp like we have for this project. Once you're done threading the reed, your loom should look like this. Next, split your warp in half and tie on to the front beam. You should do a double knot so it looks like this in the end. The last thing you need to do on the loom itself is to tie up the treadles. For this, you need to reference the pattern once again, this time looking at the treadle section. On the pattern, each petal is represented by a column. On both the loom and the pattern, the numbers are read left to right. The boxes highlighted in black will be the ones that attach to each treadle. There will be more than one shaft per treadle, that's just how the pattern's created. It can be difficult to get the clips to go on to the treadles correctly, so it may take some time. Once you finish setting up the treadles, then you're almost ready to weave. The very last thing you have to do before you can start weaving is set up your bobbins. I used an electric bobbin winder for this. You have to be careful though that your bobbin doesn't overflow like mine did during the video. Finally, you load the bobbin into your shuttle. To do this, you have to disconnect the metal rod in the middle of the shuttle. Put the bobbin directly onto it, but make sure the end is free. Carefully slide the end of the thread into the space on the side of the shuttle. Pull enough of that thread out so that there's a little bit of excess. Finally, reconnect that metal rod so that the shuttle stays closed and your bobbin can't come out. Now, with your shuttle and loom all set, you're all ready to start your first project. Thank you so much for joining me for this tutorial today. I hope you enjoyed it. Happy weaving, everyone!